Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
That's right, it's Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast that digs into the deeper levels. We go below level 1313 on Coruscant. We go so deep dive on Star Wars. I'm one of your hosts, Jedi Master John Mills, and joining me on this archaeological expedition down to the core of what makes Star Wars work is my dear friend, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Master Rushing, what have you uncovered for us this week?
Well, you know what I've uncovered, John, is, I think, an interesting topic for us to discuss.
Let's do it.
And it was actually something inspired a little bit by what we talked about last week, because, we discussed the idea of more solo stories.
Yes.
And, it's been in the news recently that Kathleen Kennedy had mentioned the idea of having the sequel characters come back in some form, and whether or not that was in film or maybe a Disney Plus type show or something like that. And so it got me thinking as to, what are the stories that I would like to see these characters in the future?
Okay, so that's our challenge, is what we want to see them in future stories. That could be prequels, that could be sequels, that could be anything. So we've got open territory here. We could see anything from anyone. My first pick, in all honesty, because I was so intrigued by the comics and the book that came out about her between Episode 7 and Episode 8, before I was sorely disappointed about the fact that seemed like a giant head fake, is Captain Phasma. I would like a series about Captain Phasma. Not like 5 seasons or anything like that. I'd like a 1-season exploration of Captain Phasma within the context of the First Order and how she got there and how she rose through the ranks. And it would be extremely easy to do because you have a character behind a helmet, almost like a Mandalorian sort of thing. You could do like a mirror of the Mandalorian, which, given Phasma's mirrored armor, would make sense. Maybe, I don't know, going for an easy joke here. But what do you think about that? Would you watch a Phasma series if they were like, look, limited series, 8 episodes, here's all about Phasma?
That's a really interesting thought. It's not something that I had in mind, but, I think like you said, we talked about Delilah Dawson's book Phasma over on the 602 Club. We reviewed it. We both actually really enjoyed the book. We thought it was well written. We thought it did the character justice. It made the character come to life in a way that obviously, sadly, the movie series never did, and gave the character a lot of depth to which we just never got to explore. So I would actually be behind having a short run, 1-season series of like 6 episodes to explore the character of Captain Phasma, and I think it would be fantastic. You could use the book as a basis. I think that wouldn't be a bad place to start. At the same time, I think there are still plenty of other stories to tell with her and her rise through the ranks of the First Order. So I like that idea. I think that would be really interesting. And I think it's the type of thing, as with all good, tie-in fiction and those kind of things, expanded universe, makes the character more interesting then as you watch the movies again.
I'm glad that you like the idea, but I'm interested because you threw the gauntlet down there. That's the first thing I've got coming out of the gate. What are you thinking of? What would you want to see? And the thing is, I want to keep this very much. I want us to be thinking of screen representation, specifically because the books and the comics, even though Disney claimed, oh, it's all going to be connected and everything's going to blah, 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 all the usual promises, screen feels like it's got a little more weight to it. It has a little more authority to it. Always has with Star Wars. What would you want to see on screen? What series, movie, something like that with any of these characters.
Yeah. I do think it would be very interesting to do a continuation with the characters of Rey, Finn, and Poe. I think, one, because I would love to see Oscar Isaac do anything. I think he's fantastic. He was phenomenal in Dune. He was great with the role in the sense of anything he was given to do in the sequel trilogy. I loved him, and so I would love to see him again. But I think, you set up these characters. Finn obviously has the ability to be a part of a new Jedi Order with Rey, which I think is really interesting as she tries to set that up and to create, a new way for the Jedi, maybe. That could be fascinating. Poe seems to be somebody who would be more of a military leader or, in many ways, kind of taking on that Leia role where possibly he's, the Chancellor of a New Republic. And that would be fascinating to see. Or some kind of military leader, but that puts them all in the same playing field. And you could have them in episodes together. I would be interested to see them progress in that way. And really, I think mainly the one thing that I love the most about The Rise of Skywalker is getting to see those characters on screen together. And I would like to see them have more time together, because I think that's when they were most interesting. That's when they were most fun. And just like the original trilogy characters. So that's what I think would be really interesting to see. And, I think maybe doing 2 seasons of that on Disney Plus would be pretty cool.
I do think that would be pretty cool. I don't know if I'd want to see all 3 of them together. I feel like that's played out. My sense after the sequel trilogy is they gave it their best go. I got some good stuff to work with, but there's nothing about the dynamic of these characters that lit me up the same way that I wanted to continually read books and adventures from Han, Luke, and Leia, or Han, Lando, and Kira. I don't have the same fire for those core characters, which is interesting because it's really the villains in the sequel trilogy that I think are the ones that have the real stuff to mine, to figure out. I think we're going to wind up spending more time with Snoke in one way or another with what's being set up in the Mandalorian timeline. I think we're eventually going to get to him. Not anytime soon, but I see him as a long-range plan for bridging the gap, as it were. And the thing is, Snoke would be really interesting to me just because he's well-known enough that Han and Leia know him. People know who Snoke is outside of the First Order, that he has a history. Like, there has to be something there, something more to go off of than what we got. So that seems like an interesting history to plumb, but not to stay just with the villains. If I were looking at the heroes, I would want to see something with Maz Kanata. But the difficulty with that is, even though it's just voice talent, can I get the same actress back for Maz in a live action series? And I don't want the puppet from Rise of Skywalker, okay? I don't want the puppet. I don't understand why they made that choice. I'm on record with that.
Yeah.
I want the Maz Kanata that I encountered in The Force Awakens, where I said, oh, that's an interesting character. Mm-hmm. That's really memorable and interesting. I want the Maz Kanata that was hinted at in the lead-up materials for The Force Awakens, where some dark stuff was going on in that castle. That's what I want. I want a Maz Kanata series, or even a movie. I don't think a movie. I think we're beyond movies at this point. A Maz Kanata series, that would be super interesting, because she's talked about, she's seen the Jedi, she's seen the Sith, she's been alive for 1,000 years. She's a Yoda longevity type of. You could actually have her have a meeting with Yoda in the series, or a flashback with him.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that's a really I mean, just as character that, we got introduced to in the sequel trilogy. I think she was a fascinating character and really underserved, honestly, with what we got. And would love to know more about her, especially since obviously she continues. So I think there's so much that you could do with her, and that would be kind of fascinating. Another thing that I think, aside from what I mentioned with the three characters, I do think having a show devoted to Rey creating a new Jedi Order is very interesting, where the other and her going on a journey of discovery, finding out as much as she can about Jedi lore and all that kind of stuff to figure out what, type of order she wants to create, and to avoid as much as she can the same mistakes of the past. I think all that could be really interesting, and I do enjoy Daisy Ridley, and so I think it's also a time for us to just be able to get to know that character more intimately, to be able to spend time with that character and to really grow that character, and so that's something I think would be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. If I stay on screen, I think a Daisy Ridley, a Rey series could be interesting. I could say a Rey, if you really wanted to be bold, you could have her on Tatooine and have Finn come look for her and repeat the Luke arc where she says, "I don't want any part to do with anything." But give her the Luke arc that Lucas envisioned, where she's had some sort of series of visions where she's seen the world beyond ours. And so she has lost contact with our world in the sense that she's so beyond it that she doesn't understand why she should care about it anymore. And then Finn can bring her back to her humanity, which is, again, that's the arc that Lucas was seeing with Luke. That would have been so much more interesting. But you have that I'm on board with very much. I want to ask you, though, what about an animated series? And an animated series in specific that helps us ameliorate some of the things that we might have had a problem with Luke's arc in The Last Jedi, where we get a little bit more clarity and urgency about his background, because I remember at the time on social media, Pablo Hidalgo said that Kylo's departure from the Jedi Order was a lot closer to the events of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi than people thought it was. Meaning Kylo leaving the Jedi Order and doing what he did and sending Luke into that depressive spiral was a much shorter timeline than it wasn't a year prior, basically. It was 6 months beforehand. And that is not at all clear in the movie. So it also doesn't explain how Kylo's able to raise through the ranks and all of that. It would have a lot of work cut out for it. But do you think that could help? Would you want to see a Luke Skywalker, Kylo Ren animated series set before the movies?
Absolutely. I think giving us that, there is the comic series that Charles Soule did, which was interesting with Kylo Ren, but I do think that that's just an area that is got so much to it. Again, that's 30 years, and so we're barely scratching the surface with that, with The Mandalorian. And so what you do after that and where all of these things begin to connect, I do think would be fantastic to see. And how did these characters kind of get to the place they are, and I don't know what the plan is, obviously, but I really do think that's a story that could, like you said, definitely ameliorate issues that a lot of people have, but at the same time, it's just an interesting story to tell, especially if you could at least get, Adam Driver back as well to voice Kylo Ren. He's just such a great actor, and to have him back with anything in Star Wars would be fantastic, because regardless of how I ever felt about that character, Adam Driver was always really good in anything he could do.
Yeah.
Like Oscar Isaac, it's like, yeah, everything he did was gold. It wasn't necessarily that I loved the storyline they had for them, but the actor was fantastic.
You know what I would love, and it will never, ever happen. If it were to happen, I promise you right now, if I were ever to see a live action series that pursued what I thought was the possibility between Poe and Kylo and their history prior to The Force Awakens, that would show them as sort of frenemies where Kylo was jealous of Poe's relationship with his mom, and see that sort of teased out and have a competition for Leia's love sort of thing. Live action will never happen. I will promise you right now that if they had a live action, even recasting Leia or the other parts or anything like that, I would pour ketchup on a shoe and eat it, and have Matt talk on the microphone while he watched my reaction to eating it. We might even videotape it and show it on YouTube. That's how sure I am that we would never get a series like that. But animated even, I would love something that would tease that out, because my brain saw the possibility that Kylo and Poe had some sort of emotional turmoil between them, knew each other prior to The Force Awakens. And that's why Kylo's whole line when Poe wakes up in the torture chamber is he's like, "Oh, look, Sea Alliance, it's the Resistance's best pilot." And it's one of those things because obviously Kylo regards himself as the best pilot, and maybe Poe beat him in a race or some sort of contest, and Leia was too openly congratulatory of Poe. And that would be really fascinating to me, because I always thought it would be so interesting that it wasn't just Luke's behavior that drove Kylo into Snoke's arms, but that Leia recognized that she wasn't the best mom she could have been, and Han definitely wasn't the best dad he could have been. Wouldn't that be an interesting show? Wouldn't you want to watch that, even if it was animated?
Yeah, I like that idea. And as you were thinking, I was just thinking how interesting it would be to have, a Poe prequel series as well, just to be able to see, obviously we have the Freefall book that came out, which was actually pretty good, which gave his backstory with Zori Bliss, which I really enjoyed her character, and I thought she was a great addition. It actually just gave Poe a lot of humanity, in that movie. And so being able to see some of that play out on screen, I think would be fantastic. And I think part of that is just that, in all honesty, I just really enjoy, and I think this is obvious as people are listening, I enjoy the character of Poe Dameron a lot. I thought he was a really fun character. He didn't, to me, just feel like Han Solo light. He, especially as they kind of developed him, they gave him some of his own sense of being and everything. And that, again, I think that was really helped by giving him some depth of, him being a spice runner. And yes, that sounds very Han-ish, but the way they did that in the book was really good, actually. And I would love to see some of that actually play out on screen, because, yeah, he was a fun character to be a part of. And honestly, I think the underworld of the sequel trilogy was kind of fascinating to me. We saw all of these different factions in The Force Awakens, and we saw Maz's castle, and in many ways, I kind of would love to know more about that as well. I think that could be a cool show.
Well, I mean, to your point, we could find a way to work Poe into a Maz's castle sort of thing, and have them have some sort of history together, and that way you got... And I know there are people that would say that was small universe and stuff, but if Poe is going to be a spice runner, it makes perfect sense that Han and Poe would know each other.
Mm-hmm. What about a Maz and Chewie show where we find about their love? and how that came to be.
I would only settle for a Maz and Chewie show if it wound up being Maz wearing Itchy's helmet from the Star Wars Holiday Special, and like WandaVision, she got trapped inside of it, and she was having a married couple sitcom with Chewie, and Han was the annoying neighbor. And then eventually what it was instead of Captain Marvel 2 coming in, you would have Leia breaking through and disrupting everything. And then you would have a special appearance from Luke Skywalker, but he would be played by a different actor. And then another character would look into Maz's itchy helmet and say, oh no, she recast Luke. And then they would have a big battle at the end. It would be a big cacophonous mess, and everybody but me would love it. That's the show that I think would really be succession.
So
seems sort of specific. Yeah. Yeah. Mazda. Wait, Mazda Vision is, okay, there you go. We find out Maz's full name is Mazda, but we tie that in, and Disney can have sponsorship of the show with a car company. Wow, look at this. We have just made money for Disney right here on this show right now. You heard it, folks. You heard it. I want you to go out. I want you to evangelize this specific idea out there on the internet.
Oh, my gosh.
Seems sort of specific where we went with that.
Well, and, it's we're talking about, like, the idea of, like, Maz and Poe. And, again, you have the idea of, like, you've got that character in Zori Bliss. I mean, I think this is a really interesting idea for a show because there's a lot of ways that you can kind of organically kind of tie things together that would be interesting.
Yep.
And so, it's a thing that, the sequel trilogy was not our favorite in many ways, and yet there are still things that we could pull out of it that we could say, oh man, that would be interesting to see. And I would love to see more time with that. And I think one of the things that we've kind of always agreed about was that these were not bad characters. We just felt like that they were underserved by the material, and the actors were phenomenal. And so that's the thing we're saying, is that we like all of this stuff and we would like to see more of it. We just want the actors to really get what they're due by giving them something to really sink their teeth into.
I could put it in a much less eloquent way, but that would just wind up getting big old crosshairs posted on me online. So instead, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell everybody where they can find you online to discuss these ideas, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing.
Well, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02, whether that's Twitter, Vero, Instagram, Letterboxd, all those type of places. You can also find me here on the network in a Finnish show with Drea Kaufman, as we talked about Harry Potter each and every week. We did that one chapter at a time, and it's a Finnish show now, so you can listen to the whole thing. You can also find me over on the TFM network doing a bunch of shows. One is called the 602 Club, where we talk about every fandom we love. We have also got a couple bonus shows that John is on. One's called Snyder Cuts, about everything Zack Snyder directed, as well as right now we're currently walking through all of the Marvel franchise. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise, and The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But John, if people want to throw some ideas at you about where they'd like to see the sequel characters or what they'd be interested in seeing them do, where can they find you?
Well, you can direct hate mail to me at Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. I can't quit Twitter because I have apparently an addictive personality for things that are bad for me. And you can also find me as Kessel Junkie over on Letterboxd. Right here on the network, you can find me co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we look at the work of different directors in different phases of their careers for the whole career. Go over, listen to the show. You'll get a taste for what it's all about. But all of that said, the one idea we did not explore was recipes of the sequel trilogy. And I'm curious as to whether the bantha steak or the fried tip yip are as good in the sequel trilogy as they are in the original trilogy. So Master Rushing, I have to go to the library with Master Jocasta Nu and figure out to this. So I think it's time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.